Cole Hart had sworn never to care again until an 11-year-old girl threw herself in front of his horse and shattered every wall he'd built. Her mother was dying, her brother was screaming, and the most powerful man in Wyoming territory wanted them gone. Cole had spent 5 years running from grief, from responsibility, from anything that could hurt him again. But Lila Dawson's fierce eyes held something he couldn't ride away from, a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, one decent man still existed in this godforsaken territory. What happened next would test whether a drifter could become the father a broken family needed, or whether some wounds run too deep to heal. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you love stories about second chances and unexpected families, you're in exactly the right place. Now, let's begin. The Wyoming territory stretched endless and indifferent under the November sky, all sage and dust and wind that cut through a man's coat like it had a personal grudge. Cole Hart rode through it the way he'd ridden through the last 5 years, alone, quiet, and committed to staying that way. His horse picked careful steps along the rutted trail that wound between rocky outcrops and scattered juniper. Cole's hat was pulled low, his collar turned up against the cold, his saddlebags light because a man who didn't plan to stop anywhere didn't need much. He'd left Cheyenne 3 days ago with winter wages in his pocket and no particular destination in mind. Just away. Always away. That's when the girl appeared. She came from nowhere, a flash of movement, a desperate scramble, and suddenly she was there in the middle of the trail, thin arms spread wide, face tilted up toward his horse with an expression that was equal parts terror and defiance. Cole's gelding snorted and shied. Cole pulled back hard on the reins, the leather biting into his palms. "What the hell? Please!" The word came out strangled, breathless. "Please, mister, I need help." She couldn't have been more than 11, all sharp elbows and tangled brown hair, wearing a dress that had been patched so many times it was hard to tell what the original fabric had been. Her face was streaked with dirt and something darker, dried blood, Cole realized with a cold twist in his gut. "Step aside, kid," he said, his voice flat. He'd learned the hard way that getting involved in other people's troubles was a mistake he couldn't afford to make twice. "My mama's dying." The girl's voice cracked but didn't break. She took a step closer, her small hands reaching up toward his stirrup. "Please." Everyone else, they all said no. They're all too scared. "But you're a stranger. You don't know. You could—" I said step aside. But she didn't. She grabbed his boot instead, her fingers thin and desperate, her eyes locked on his with a ferocity that reminded him of a cornered animal, something wild and wounded and absolutely refusing to give up. "She fell," the girl rushed on, words tumbling over each other. "From the roof. She was trying to patch the hole before winter and she fell, and there's blood everywhere, and Mason won't stop screaming, and I tried to stop the bleeding, but it won't stop, and the doctor won't come out here anymore because we can't pay, and—" "Kid," Cole's voice came out harder than he intended. "I can't help you." "Yes, you can." She pulled herself up straighter, lifting her chin in a way that was probably meant to look brave but just made her look impossibly young. "You got a horse, you got supplies. You ain't from here, so you don't owe nobody nothing. You could—" "Listen to me." Cole leaned down, making sure she could see his face, see the certainty there. "Whatever's happening to your mama, I'm sorry, but I don't get involved. I don't help. I keep writing. That's what I do. Now let go of my boot." For a long moment she just stared at him. Then something shifted in her expression, not defeat exactly, but a kind of terrible understanding, like she'd seen this particular brand of abandonment before. "Okay," she whispered. Her hands fell away from his boot. "Okay." She stepped back from the trail, her thin shoulders hunched against the wind, and Cole told himself to ride on. Told himself that whatever tragedy was unfolding in this corner of nowhere, it wasn't his problem, couldn't be his problem. He'd already lost everyone he'd ever cared about. His wife, his son, his whole goddamn life burned down to ash 5 years ago in a fever outbreak that took them both within 3 days of each other. He'd spent every day since then making sure he'd never have to feel that kind of loss again. The only way to do that was to never care, never stop, never let anyone need him. Cole nudged his horse forward, and that's when he heard it, a sound that cut through the wind like a knife. high and thin and absolutely inconsolable, a child screaming. His hands tightened on the reins. He didn't look back. The screaming continued somewhere in the distance, raw and terrified and utterly alone. Not my problem, not my responsibility. But his horse had stopped moving. Cole's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. God damn it, he breathed. He turned in the saddle. The girl was still standing there in the middle of the trail, watching him with those fierce, desperate eyes. Not crying, not begging anymore, just watching. Cole had spent 5 years running from moments exactly like this, from chances to care, from opportunities to fail someone again. But something about this girl's silence was worse than her pleading had been, like she'd already accepted that the world was full of men who rode on by, like she was just waiting for him to prove her right. The screaming in the distance intensified. A little boy, Cole realized. Young, maybe 3 or 4 years old, screaming like the world was ending. Son of a bitch! Cole yanked his horse around, harder than necessary. Where? The girl's eyes went wide. For a second she just stared, like she couldn't quite believe what she'd heard. Then she was running, her worn boots kicking up dust, leading him off the main trail toward a narrow track that wound between rocky hills. "Half a mile," she called back over her shoulder. "Our ranch. It's not much, but I don't care what it looks like." Cole kept his horse at a steady walk behind her. "I care about what I'm walking into. Who else is there?" "Just Mason, my little brother. He's 4, and Mama." The girl stumbled over a rock but caught herself without breaking stride. "Papa died last winter. Pneumonia. So it's just us now." Just us. 3 people alone on a failing ranch in the middle of nowhere, with winter coming and a woman bleeding out from a fall. Cole's instinct screamed at him to turn around, but his horse kept following the running girl, and he didn't pull on the reins. The ranch appeared around a bend in the trail like a ghost of better times. A small house, weathered gray by wind and sun. A barn with a sagging roof, corrals that had seen better days. The whole place had the exhausted look of a battle slowly being lost. Fences mended with whatever scraps were available, equipment that should have been replaced years ago, gardens trampled by something larger than rabbits. The screaming was coming from inside the house. The girl didn't slow down. She burst through the front door, and Cole swung down from his saddle, looping the reins over a crooked hitching post. He grabbed his saddlebags, the ones that held the basic supplies a drifter learned to carry, and followed her inside. The smell hit him first. Blood and fear, and the particular scent of a home that had been pushed past its limits. The main room was small and dim, with a stone fireplace on one wall and a narrow staircase leading up to what must have been a loft. A pot sat cold on the cook stove. Dishes were stacked unwashed in a basin. And in the corner, on a narrow bed that looked like it had been dragged down from upstairs, was the woman. She was pale, too pale, and unconscious, her breathing shallow and ragged. Blood had soaked through the blanket someone had pressed against her side, dark and spreading. Her dress was torn, her face bruised, her auburn hair matted with sweat and dirt. Next to the bed, a little boy sat curled into a ball, his hands pressed over his ears, screaming and screaming and screaming. "Mason, stop!" The girl dropped to her knees beside him, her voice desperate. "Mason, please. I brought help. It's going to be okay now." But the boy didn't stop. He just rocked back and forth, his eyes squeezed shut, his whole small body shaking. Cole set his saddlebags down and moved to the bedside. He'd seen injuries before. Cowboying was dangerous work, and he'd spent enough time in rough camps to know basic field medicine. But this was bad. The woman's side was torn open, probably from hitting something sharp on the way down. Ribs broken, maybe. Internal bleeding, possibly. "How long ago did she fall?" he asked, not looking up from his examination. 3 hours. The girl's voice was thin. "Maybe 4. I tried to stop the bleeding, but—" "You did fine." Cole pulled back the blood-soaked blanket, assessing the damage. The wound was deep, ragged, and still weeping blood despite the girl's attempts at pressure. "What's your name?" "Lila Dawson." "Lila, I need you to listen carefully. I'm going to try to stop this bleeding, but your mama needs a doctor. Where's the nearest town?" "Elkhorn, 8 miles east." Lila's hands twisted in her skirt. But the doctor won't come. Mr. Crow told him not to. Cole's hands stilled. Who's Mr. Crow? Silas Crow. He owns most of the land around here. He wants our ranch, says we can't keep it running without Papa, and he's probably right, but Mama won't sell. So he... Lila's voice dropped to a whisper. He bought our debt at the bank. And now he's just waiting for us to fail so he can take it. Cole's jaw tightened. He'd met men like Silas Crow before, men who saw other people's suffering as opportunity, men who understood that fear was cheaper than fair dealing. And the doctor works for Crow? The doctor works for whoever pays him. And right now, that ain't us. Lila looked down at her mother's pale face. Nobody in the territory will help us anymore. They're all too scared of what Crow might do. In the corner, Mason's screaming had dissolved into hiccuping sobs. Cole glanced at the boy, small, terrified, traumatized by whatever he'd seen when his mother fell. 4 years old and already learning that the world was a dangerous place where mothers bled and strangers didn't stop. Not my problem, not my responsibility. But Cole's hands were already moving, pulling supplies from his saddlebags. Needle and thread, whiskey for sterilization, clean cloth for bandages. The basic tools of survival that every drifter carried because you never knew when you'd be too far from help to wait for it. Lila, he said quietly, I need you to take your brother outside. This is going to be bad, and he doesn't need to see it. I can help. I'm strong enough to... I know you are. Cole met her eyes, saw the fierce competence there, the way she'd been holding this family together through sheer stubborn will. But right now, the best help you can give me is keeping Mason calm. Can you do that? Lila hesitated, then nodded. She scooped Mason up. He was small enough that she could still carry him, though just barely, and headed for the door. The boy's sobs muffled against her shoulder. Mister? Lila paused in the doorway, her thin frame silhouetted against the gray afternoon light. What's your name? Cole. Cole Hart. Thank you, Mr. Hart. Her voice was steady despite everything. For stopping. Then she was gone, and Cole was alone with the unconscious woman and the choice he'd just made. He poured whiskey over his hands, over the needle, over the wound itself. The woman, Evelyn Dawson, he assumed, didn't even flinch. That wasn't a good sign. Cole had seen men slip away from injuries less severe than this, seen them fade out so quietly you didn't realize they were gone until you checked for a pulse. Don't you dare, he muttered, threading the needle. Don't you dare leave those kids alone. The stitching took 20 minutes. Cole worked carefully, methodically, the way he'd learned from an old camp cook who'd served as a field medic in the war. Small stitches, close together, pulling the torn flesh back into alignment. The wound was deep enough that he had to work in layers, muscle first, then skin. Blood soaked his hands. His back ached from bending over the low bed. And the whole time, a voice in his head kept asking what the hell he thought he was doing, getting involved in this disaster, tying himself to people who would only drag him down or break his heart, or both. But his hands kept working. When the stitching was done, he bandaged the wound with clean cloth, wrapping it tight around Evelyn's ribs. Then he checked her pulse, thready but present, and her breathing, shallow but steady. She'd lost a lot of blood, too much probably, and even if the external bleeding stopped, there could be internal damage he couldn't see or fix. She needed a real doctor. Cole stood, his knees cracking, and looked around the small house. There were signs of poverty everywhere, in the mended curtains, the worn furniture, the empty pantry shelves visible through the kitchen doorway. But there were also signs of love. Children's drawings pinned to the wall, a carefully tended herb garden visible through the window, a man's coat hanging by the door, kept even though its owner was dead because some losses you couldn't quite bring yourself to acknowledge. This family had been fighting hard to survive, and losing. Cole walked to the door and stepped outside. Lila was sitting on the front steps with Mason in her lap, singing something soft and tuneless. The boy had stopped crying, though his face was still blotchy and his breathing hitched every few seconds. She's stable, Cole said. For now, but she needs a doctor, Lila, a real one. Lila looked up at him with those fierce, desperate eyes. Dr. Brennan won't come. I already asked. Then I'll make him come. Cole moved toward his horse, But Lila was on her feet in an instant, Mason clinging to her like a burr. "You can't. Mr. Crow will— I don't give a damn what Mr. Crow will do." Cole swung into the saddle, gathering the reins. "I'll be back before dark. There's food in my saddlebags, bread and dried beef. Make sure your brother eats something. And if your mama's condition changes, if she wakes up or gets worse, you come find me on the Elkhorn Road. Understand?" Lila nodded slowly, something like hope flickering in her expression. Cole turned his horse toward the trail, then paused. "One more thing. What did Mason see when your mama fell?" Lila's face went tight. "Everything. She was on the roof, and she slipped, and Mason was right there in the yard, and he saw her hit the ground, and he saw all the blood, and he hasn't said a word since, just screaming." Cole's chest tightened. 4 years old, the same age his son had been when the fever took him. Old enough to understand that something terrible had happened, but too young to make sense of it. Old enough for nightmares that would last years. "Keep him close," Cole said quietly. "And Lila, you did good today. Better than most grown men would have done." Then he was riding, pushing his horse into a canter, putting distance between himself and the choice he'd just made. But even as the Dawson Ranch disappeared behind him, Cole knew the truth. He'd already stopped running. The ride to Elkhorn took an hour through country that grew rougher the farther east he went. The trail wound through rocky hills and scattered pine, past abandoned homesteads and the burned-out shells of dreams that hadn't survived the harsh territory. Cole kept his horse at a steady pace, watching for trouble out of habit. The sun was low on the horizon by the time the town appeared, a cluster of weathered buildings huddled around a single dusty street. Elkhorn was the kind of frontier town that existed because someone had found water and decided that was reason enough to stay. A general store, a saloon, a livery stable, a few other structures that might have been homes or businesses or both. And at the end of the street, a small house with a shingle hanging out front. Dr. Samuel Brennan, physician. Cole tied his horse outside and knocked hard on the door. No answer. He knocked again, harder. "Dr. Brennan, open up." Still nothing. Cole tried the handle, unlocked, and pushed inside. The front room was set up as a medical office, with an examination table, glass-fronted cabinets full of bottles and instruments, and the particular smell of carbolic and ether that meant someone here actually knew medicine. But the room was empty, the lamp unlit, the stove cold. "He ain't here." Cole turned. A man stood in the doorway, older, weathered, wearing a shopkeeper's apron. His expression was wary, the kind of wariness that came from living in a place where asking questions could be dangerous. "Where is he?" Cole asked. "Gone to the Crow Ranch. One of the hands got kicked by a horse." The shopkeeper's eyes flicked over Cole, assessing. "You need a doctor?" "I need this doctor. When will he be back?" "Tomorrow, maybe. Day after, if Silas decides he needs tending." The shopkeeper paused. "You're not from around here." It wasn't a question. Cole ignored it. "There's a woman 8 miles west, Evelyn Dawson. She's badly hurt and she needs—" "Evelyn Dawson." The shopkeeper's expression closed down immediately. "Can't help you there, friend." "I'm not asking you to help. I'm asking the doctor to do his job." "The doctor does what Silas Crow allows him to do. And Silas has made it real clear. Nobody helps the Dawsons. Not anymore." The shopkeeper stepped back toward the door. "You want my advice? Ride on. Whatever you think you're getting into, it's worse than you know." Cole's hands clenched at his sides. "A woman is dying. Lots of people die out here. That's the territory. You can't save them all, and trying just gets you hurt." The shopkeeper glanced over his shoulder like he was checking to see if anyone had overheard. "Look, I'm sorry about Evelyn. She's a good woman. But her husband borrowed money he couldn't pay back, and Silas Crow owns that debt now. He wants that ranch, and he's going to get it. That's just how things work around here." "And everyone's fine with that?" "Everyone's smart enough not to make enemies of the most powerful man in the territory." The shopkeeper met Cole's eyes. "You should be too." Then he was gone, disappearing back toward the general store, leaving Cole standing in the empty doctor's office with the understanding that he'd just walked into something more complicated than a woman with a medical emergency. This was a town living under someone's thumb, a place where fear had replaced community, where people looked the other way because getting involved meant putting yourself in Silas Crow's crosshairs. Cole knew what the smart thing to do was. Ride back to the Dawson Ranch, tell Lila he'd tried, and then keep going. Leave these people to their own problems, protect himself from another round of loss and grief. But when he closed his eyes, he saw Lila's fierce, desperate face, heard Mason's terrified screaming, saw Evelyn bleeding out in that narrow bed. God damn it, Cole breathed. He walked out of the doctor's office and headed for the general store. If the doctor wouldn't come, he'd need supplies, bandages, medicine, anything that might keep Evelyn alive until he could figure out another solution. The shopkeeper looked up when Cole entered, his expression wary. Thought you'd be riding on. I need supplies. Cole pulled coins from his pocket. Bandages, willow bark, laudanum, if you have it. I have it. The shopkeeper didn't move. But I can't sell it to you. Can't or won't? Both. The man's voice dropped. Look, I told you Silas Crow doesn't want anyone helping the Dawsons. If I sell you medicine and he finds out, he'll make sure I regret it. I got a family to think about. Cole set the coins on the counter, more than enough to cover the supplies twice over. So do I. Now. For a long moment, the shopkeeper just stared at him. Then he sighed, a deep, tired sound, and started gathering supplies from the shelves behind the counter. You're making a mistake, he said quietly as he wrapped the items in brown paper. Silas Crow doesn't forget, and he doesn't forgive. I'll keep that in mind. Cole took the package and headed for the door. Hey! The shopkeeper's voice stopped him. What's your name? So I know who to tell them was stupid enough to cross Silas Crow. Cole looked back. Cole Hart. And I'm not crossing anyone. I'm just trying to keep a woman from dying. Out here, sometimes there's no difference. The ride back to the Dawson Ranch took longer than the ride out, darkness falling fast and the temperature dropping with it. Cole kept his horse at a careful pace, the package of supplies tucked safely in his saddlebag, his mind working through the situation he'd just walked into. Silas Crow. A land baron with enough power to control who got medical care and who didn't. A man who'd bought the Dawsons' debt and was waiting for them to fail so he could claim their ranch. And a town full of people too scared to help. Cole had seen this kind of thing before. Men who accumulated power in lawless places, who used fear and intimidation to get what they wanted. Men who understood that out here, far from courts and laws and civilized consequences, strength was the only thing that mattered. The smart move was still to walk away, to deliver the supplies, make sure Evelyn was stable, and then ride on before Crow even knew he existed. But Cole had stopped making smart moves the moment he turned his horse around for a desperate girl in the middle of a trail. The Dawson Ranch appeared in the darkness, a single lamp burning in the window like a fragile promise. Cole dismounted and carried the supplies inside. Lila was sitting beside her mother's bed, her hand wrapped around Evelyn's. Mason was curled up asleep on a pallet near the fireplace, his face blotchy from crying. The house was cold. The fire had burned low, and too quiet. How is she? Cole asked softly. The same. She hasn't woken up. Lila looked up at him, her face pinched with exhaustion. The doctor wouldn't come. The doctor was at the Crow Ranch. Cole set the supplies down and moved to check Evelyn's pulse. Still weak, but steady. But I brought what I could. He built up the fire first, then made willow bark tea to help with fever and pain, assuming Evelyn woke up enough to drink it. He checked the bandages, relieved to see that the bleeding had stopped. Then he gave Lila a small bottle of laudanum with strict instructions on dosing if her mother woke in pain. You should sleep, he told the girl. I'll watch her tonight. Lila shook her head. I can't. What if she... She won't. Not tonight. Cole pulled a chair close to the bedside. But you're no good to her exhausted. Get some rest, Lila. That's an order. Lila hesitated, then nodded. She curled up on the pallet next to Mason, pulling a thin blanket over both of them. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out into sleep. Cole sat in the chair and watched the woman in the bed struggle for each breath. Evelyn Dawson. A widow with 2 kids and a failing ranch and a powerful enemy who wanted her gone. Every instinct Cole had told him this was a fight he couldn't win, a cause that would only end in more loss. But he didn't leave. He sat there through the long, cold night, tending the fire, checking Evelyn's pulse, listening to the wind howl around the small house. And somewhere in those dark hours, he made a decision that would change everything. He would stay until Evelyn was stable, until these kids had someone to protect them from whatever Silas Crow had planned, until the immediate crisis had passed. Just a few days, Cole told himself. Just long enough to make sure they'd be okay. It was a lie, and he knew it, but it was the kind of lie that let a broken man start caring again. And sometimes, that was enough. Dawn came cold and gray, the kind of morning that promised snow before nightfall. Cole woke stiff in the chair beside Evelyn's bed, his neck protesting the awkward angle he'd slept in. The fire had burned down to embers again, and frost traced delicate patterns across the window panes. Evelyn hadn't moved all night. Her breathing remained shallow but steady, her face still too pale, her body locked in whatever battle was happening beneath the surface. Cole checked her pulse, weak but present, and rewrapped the bandages with fresh cloth. The wound looked better than he'd expected. No infection yet, at least. Small mercies. Across the room, Lila was already awake, crouched by the fireplace and coaxing the embers back to life with practiced efficiency. Mason still slept on the pallet, one small fist curled against his chest, his face finally peaceful after yesterday's terror. "How is she?" Lila asked without turning around. "Alive." Cole stood, his joints creaking. "That's something." "That's everything." Lila fed kindling into the growing flames, her movements precise despite her exhaustion. "I got coffee if you want it. Ain't much, but it's hot." Cole accepted the tin cup she offered a few minutes later, the coffee bitter and weak but warming. He stood by the window and watched the gray light spread across the ranch. The sagging barn, the patched fences, the corrals empty of livestock except for a single skinny milk cow and a few chickens scratching in the frozen dirt. "Your father kept cattle?" he asked. 20 head when he was alive, good breeding stock." Lila's voice was matter-of-fact, like she was reciting facts that had stopped hurting through sheer repetition. But after he died, Mama couldn't manage the ranch and the herd both. Had to sell most of them just to pay for the funeral and make it through winter. Now we're down to Bessie and the chickens, and that's about it. Cole studied the ranch with a cowboy's eye, cataloging the damage. Fences that wouldn't hold cattle even if they had any. A barn roof that needed replacing before the snow load brought it down. A well that looked like it might be running dry. Every surface showed neglect, not from laziness, but from simple lack of resources. One woman and 2 children couldn't maintain a working ranch, no matter how hard they tried. "What about the neighbors?" he asked. "When your father was alive, did they help each other out, share work?" "Used to." Lila poured herself coffee, her small hands wrapped around the cup for warmth. "But after Papa died, and Mr. Crow bought our debt, everyone stopped coming around. Mama said it was because they were scared. Said Mr. Crow made it clear that anyone who helped us would be making an enemy of him." "And that was enough? Fear of one man?" Lila looked at him with eyes too old for her face. "You don't know Mr. Crow. He owns half the territory, the bank, the lumber mill, most of the good grazing land. If he decides you're a problem, he can make sure you can't get credit, can't sell your cattle, can't buy supplies. He can strangle you slow without ever breaking a law." Cole had met men like that before. Men who understood that in places where the law was thin and far away, economic power was just as effective as violence. Maybe more effective because it was harder to fight back against. "How much is the debt?" he asked. $1,200. Papa borrowed it 3 years ago to buy breeding stock and make improvements. He was going to pay it back over time, but then he got sick and... Lila's voice trailed off. "Mr. Crow bought the note from the bank 6 months ago. Says we got until the end of January to pay in full, or he takes the ranch." 2 months. Less than 2 months for a widow and 2 children to come up with $1,200 when they couldn't even afford a doctor's visit. It was impossible, and Silas Crow knew it. Cole drained his coffee and set the cup down. "I need to check the property, see what kind of shape things are in." "Why?" Lila's voice was wary. "You staying?" "For now." The words came out before Cole could stop them, before his better judgment could override the decision. "Until your mama's back on her feet, at least." Something flickered in Lila's expression. Hope, maybe, or just the fragile relief of not being completely alone. "We can't pay you." "I know." "And Mr. Crow?" "I'll handle Mr. Crow if it comes to that." Cole moved toward the door, pulling his coat tight against the cold. "You stay with your mama. I'll be back in a couple hours." Outside, the wind cut through his coat like it was made of paper. Cole walked the property systematically, noting everything that needed repair, everything that had already failed, everything that was one bad winter away from complete collapse. The barn roof sagged dangerously in the middle. The fences were held together with wire and hope. The well pump groaned when he tested it, coughing up water that smelled faintly of iron. This place was dying. Had been dying for months, maybe years. And Silas Crow was just waiting for it to finish falling apart so he could claim the corpse. Cole found himself in the barn, studying the empty stalls and the broken equipment stacked in corners. A wagon with a cracked axle, harnesses that needed mending, tools gone rusty from disuse. Everything spoke of a family that had run out of time and resources and hope. But the barn itself was solid. Good bones, even if the roof needed work. And the land, Cole had seen enough of it on his ride in to know it was decent grazing country. Water access, natural windbreaks. If someone put in the work, this ranch could support a family, maybe even thrive. The question was whether Cole was willing to be that someone. He was still standing in the barn when he heard the horses. 3 riders came up the trail from the east, moving at an easy pace that said they had all the time in the world. Cole stepped into the barn doorway and watched them approach. 2 were ranch hands, young, hard-faced, the kind of men who worked for wages and didn't ask questions. The third was older, better dressed, sitting his horse with the confidence of a man who knew he owned everything he could see. Silas Crow. Had to be. Cole waited as they rode into the yard. Crow pulled up first, his eyes moving over the property with the satisfied look of a man counting assets he already considered his. He was in his 50s, well-fed, wearing a coat that cost more than most cowboys made in a year. His face had the weathered look of someone who'd spent time outdoors, but his hands were soft. A desk man now, even if he'd started as something else. "You must be the stranger." Crow's voice was smooth, almost friendly. "Heard you were causing trouble in town yesterday." "Wasn't trying to cause trouble, just looking for a doctor." "For Evelyn Dawson." Crow shifted in his saddle, settling in like he was preparing for a conversation. "How is she?" "Alive. No thanks to your doctor." "My doctor was tending to an injured employee. That's his job." Crow smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm afraid Mrs. Dawson's situation is unfortunate, but it's not my responsibility to provide medical care for people who can't afford to pay for it." Cole's hands clenched at his sides. "You made sure the doctor wouldn't come, even if she could pay." "I made sure the doctor understood his priorities. There's a difference." Crow's gaze flicked to the house, then back to Cole. "I don't believe we've been introduced. Silas Crow. I own most of the productive land in this territory." Cole Hart. "I don't own anything." "A drifter, then?" Crow nodded, like this confirmed something. "Let me guess. Lila threw herself in front of your horse with some desperate story, and you made the mistake of feeling sorry for her. Now you think you're going to help this family hold on to a ranch they can't possibly maintain." "I think I'm going to make sure a woman doesn't die because you're too cheap to let a doctor do his job." One of the ranch hands shifted in his saddle, his hand moving toward his belt. Crow held up a finger, and the man went still. "Let me explain something to you, Mr. Hart." Crow's voice remained pleasant, conversational. "This ranch has been failing for 2 years. John Dawson was a good man, but a poor businessman. He borrowed money he couldn't repay, made improvements that didn't increase productivity, and left his widow with a debt she has no hope of clearing. I bought that debt as a business investment, and in 2 months, this property will belong to me. That's not cruelty. That's economics." "Economics that require making sure a widow can't get medical care?" "I don't require anything. I simply don't interfere with the natural course of events." Crow gathered his reins. "Mrs. Dawson made her choices. She could have sold to me months ago for a fair price. She could have accepted my offer to forgive the debt in exchange for the property. Instead, she chose to struggle on, dragging her children deeper into poverty with her. That's not my fault." Cole took a step forward. "You know she can't pay that debt. You're just waiting for her to fail." "I'm waiting for her to accept reality." Crow's pleasant expression finally cracked, showing something harder underneath. "This is my territory, Mr. Hart. I built it from nothing. I brought order and prosperity to a lawless wilderness, and I don't appreciate drifters showing up and interfering in matters they don't understand. I understand plenty. Do you? Crow leaned forward in his saddle. Do you understand that if you stay here, you're making yourself my enemy? Do you understand what that means in a place where I control access to credit, supplies, and employment? Where the sheriff is on my payroll and the judge owes me favors? Sounds like you've built yourself a comfortable little kingdom. I've built stability, something this territory desperately needed. Crow straightened. I'm going to give you the same advice I give every well-meaning fool who tries to interfere in my business. Ride on, today, before you find out exactly how much power I have out here. Cole met his eyes and didn't blink. I'll leave when I'm ready, not before. For a long moment, Crow just stared at him. Then he smiled, a cold, thin expression that held no humor at all. Your choice, Mr. Hart. But don't say I didn't warn you. He turned his horse. Come on, boys. Let's leave Mr. Hart to his good deed. He'll learn soon enough. They rode off at the same easy pace they'd arrived, disappearing down the trail toward town. Cole watched until they were out of sight, then released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He'd just made an enemy of the most powerful man in the territory. Smart move, Hart. Real smart. But when he turned back toward the house and saw Lila watching from the window, her thin face pressed against the glass, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. The next 3 days fell into a rhythm. Cole worked from dawn until dark, tackling the most urgent repairs. He patched the barn roof with scavenged lumber and tar paper, shored up the fences with whatever materials he could cobble together, fixed the well pump so it didn't sound like it was dying with every stroke. Hard, physical labor that left his muscles aching and his hands blistered. It felt good. Felt purposeful in a way nothing had felt for 5 years. Evelyn remained unconscious, her body fighting whatever battle raged inside. Cole changed her bandages twice a day, forced water between her lips when he could, and watched for signs of fever or infection. Lila helped when she could, her small hands surprisingly steady as she held basins and fetched fresh cloth. You're good at this, Cole told her on the third afternoon as they worked together to clean the wound. Medical work, I mean. You got a steady hand. Lila kept her eyes on her task. Mama taught me. Said out here, you never know when you'll need to tend injuries yourself. Doctors too far away to count on. Your mama sounds like a practical woman. She's tough, tougher than most men I've met. Lila's voice was fierce. She'll beat this. She has to. Cole didn't answer. He'd seen tough people succumb to less severe injuries, seen strong men give up and slip away because their bodies had reached the limit of what they could endure. But he didn't say that to Lila. She needed hope more than she needed honesty. Mason remained a ghost in his own home. He followed Lila everywhere, silent and wide-eyed, flinching at sudden movements and loud noises. He wouldn't go near his mother's bedside, wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat unless Lila coaxed him. The trauma of seeing his mother fall had locked him somewhere deep inside himself. On the fourth morning, Cole found the boy standing in the yard, staring at the barn with an expression of absolute terror on his small face. What's wrong? Cole asked, crouching down to Mason's level. Mason didn't answer. He just pointed at the barn with a shaking hand. Cole followed his gaze and understood. The barn was where the horses were kept, and Mason's father had died working with horses, teaching them, training them, until one kicked him in the chest hard enough to crack ribs that punctured a lung. Pneumonia had finished what the injury started. Now this 4-year-old boy looked at horses and saw death. You're scared of them, Cole said quietly. It wasn't a question. Mason's silence was answer enough. Cole stood and studied the boy. Trauma this deep didn't heal quick, might not heal at all without help, but standing here frozen with fear wasn't helping either. Come with me, Cole said, holding out his hand. Mason shrank back, shaking his head violently. I'm not going to make you do anything you don't want to do. Just come with me, please. After a long moment, Mason took his hand. His small fingers were ice cold despite the relative warmth of the morning. Cole led him to the barn slowly, letting Mason set the pace. When they reached the doorway, the boy froze again, his whole body rigid with fear. It's okay, Cole said softly. We're just going to look, that's all. Cole's gelding stood in the nearest stall, munching hay with the placid indifference of a well-fed horse. He was an old campaigner, steady, calm, the kind of horse that didn't spook easy. His name's Dusty, Cole said. Had him for 3 years now. He's about the laziest horse in Wyoming territory. See how he's just standing there? That's what he does most of the time. Stands around, eats, complains when I ask him to work. Mason didn't look convinced, but he hadn't run away either. That was progress. Horses aren't mean, Mason. They're just big and strong, and sometimes they get scared just like we do. When they get scared, sometimes they hurt people by accident, like what happened to your papa. Cole kept his voice low and even. But most of the time, if you're careful and calm around them, they're the gentlest creatures in the world. Mason's grip on Cole's hand tightened. You don't have to touch him. Don't even have to come close. But I want you to see that he's just an animal. Just a big, dumb, hay-eating animal who wouldn't hurt a fly on purpose. They stood there for a long time, Mason watching Dusty eat, his small body gradually relaxing. When a sparrow flew into the barn and Dusty didn't even twitch, Mason's shoulders lowered a fraction. See, Cole said. Nothing to be afraid of. That was a lie, of course. There was plenty to be afraid of. Horses were dangerous if you didn't know what you were doing. Life was dangerous. People fell off roofs and died of pneumonia and left their children behind to figure out how to survive. But fear couldn't run your life. Cole knew that better than most. They left the barn together, Mason still silent, but walking a little taller. It wasn't much, but it was something. That evening, as Cole was repairing a section of fence near the house, he saw riders approaching from the west. 3 of them this time, moving fast. Not Crow. These were working cowboys, their clothes dusty and worn, their horses lathered like they'd been pushed hard. Cole set down his tools and moved toward the house. Lila, get inside. Take Mason. She appeared in the doorway immediately, her face tight with worry. Who is it? Don't know, but I don't like the look of it. The riders pulled up in the yard, their horses blowing hard. The lead rider was young, maybe 20, with a cocky set to his shoulders that said he was used to people getting out of his way. You Cole Hart? He called out. Depends on who's asking. Name's Travis. I work for Mr. Crow. The young man's hand rested casually on the gun at his hip. He sent us with a message. I'm listening. Mr. Crow wants you to know he's a reasonable man. He understands you thought you were helping when you stayed here, but the help ain't needed anymore, and it's time for you to move on. Cole crossed his arms. Mrs. Dawson might disagree. Mrs. Dawson ain't in a position to disagree with much of anything, seems like. Travis grinned, showing teeth. Point is, Mr. Crow's being generous. He's offering you $100 to leave today, cash money. That's more than you'd make in 3 months cowboying. Tell Mr. Crow I appreciate the offer, but I'll be staying. The grin faded. That wasn't a negotiation, Hart. That was a courtesy. Next time, we won't be so polite. Next time, I won't be either. Travis's hand tightened on his gun, but one of the other riders, older, with more sense, grabbed his arm. Come on, we delivered the message. Let's go. They rode off, leaving dust and implied threats hanging in the air. Cole watched them go, his jaw tight. This was escalating. Crow had tried reason, tried intimidation, and now he was trying bribery. When that failed, and it would fail, things would get uglier. Cole should leave. Should take the smart path and put distance between himself and this disaster before Crow decided to make his point with violence instead of words. But when he turned back to the house, Lila was standing in the doorway, her thin arms wrapped around Mason, her eyes fixed on Cole with an expression that held both fear and desperate hope. You're really staying? She asked quietly. Cole looked at her, this 11-year-old girl who'd been forced to be the adult in her family, who'd been holding everything together through sheer stubborn will, who'd thrown herself in front of a stranger's horse because she had no other options left. Yeah, he said, I'm really staying. That night, Evelyn's fever broke. Cole was dozing in the chair when he heard it, a soft, pained intake of breath that was different from the shallow breathing she'd maintained for days. He was on his feet immediately, lamp in hand, bending over the bed. Evelyn's eyes were open, clouded with pain and confusion, but open. Easy, Cole said softly. Don't try to move. You've been hurt. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Cole lifted her head gently and pressed a cup of water to her mouth. She managed a few sips before falling back, exhausted. Where? Her voice was barely a whisper. Where are my children? Sleeping. They're fine. You're all fine. Evelyn's eyes found his face, struggling to focus. Who are you? Cole Hart. Your daughter found me on the trail, asked me to help. Lila. The word came out with relief and worry mixed together. She's too young to... She's exactly old enough to save your life. She did everything right. Cole adjusted the blanket around Evelyn's shoulders. You need to rest now. We can talk in the morning. But Evelyn's hand shot out, surprisingly strong despite her weakness, and grabbed his wrist. Crow, Silas Crow, he'll... I know about Crow, and I'm handling it. No! Her grip tightened. You don't understand. He'll hurt you. He hurts everyone who helps us. You need to leave before... Mrs. Dawson, Cole's voice was firm but gentle. I'm not leaving. Not until you're well enough to handle things yourself. And maybe not even then. Evelyn stared at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for something. Truth, maybe, or trustworthiness, or just the simple fact that he was still there when everyone else had abandoned her family. Why? She whispered. It was a good question. Cole wasn't sure he had a good answer. Or maybe he had too many answers, all tangled up with grief and guilt and the memory of his own family that he couldn't save. Because your daughter asked, he said finally, and because it's the right thing to do. Evelyn's eyes drifted closed, but her grip on his wrist didn't loosen. Thank you. Then she was asleep again, her breathing deeper and more natural than it had been in days. Cole gently freed his wrist and settled back into the chair. Through the window, he could see the first hint of dawn touching the eastern sky. Another day coming, more work to be done, more threats from Crow to deal with, more reasons to leave that he would ignore. Cole had spent 5 years running from any situation that might require him to care about someone, running from responsibility, from attachment, from the risk of loss. But sitting in this cold house, watching over a family that had every reason to give up, but hadn't, Cole realized something important. He was done running. Whatever came next, whatever Silas Crow had planned, whatever battles lay ahead, Cole would face it here. Not because he was brave, but because these people needed him. And maybe, just maybe, he needed them too. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning frost. The ranch woke slowly, chickens clucking, Bessie the cow lowing for her morning milking, the wind rattling loose boards that still needed fixing. And Cole Hart, who'd sworn never to care about anyone again, sat vigil over a stranger's bedside and felt something he hadn't felt in 5 long years. Purpose. Evelyn's recovery came in small, hard-won increments. By the end of the first week, she could sit up for short periods without the room spinning. By the second, she could take a few steps with Lila's support, though the pain in her side made her gasp and her face go white. Cole watched her struggle with the same fierce determination her daughter possessed, refusing help she clearly needed, pushing herself harder than was wise. You're going to tear those stitches, he told her one afternoon as she attempted to walk to the kitchen unassisted. I've been lying in that bed for 2 weeks. Evelyn's voice was thin but stubborn. My children need me. The ranch needs me. I can't afford to be an invalid. You can't afford to make yourself worse either. Cole took her elbow, steadying her when she swayed. Let yourself heal. The ranch isn't going anywhere. Evelyn laughed, a bitter sound. That's exactly what I'm afraid of. That Crow will take it while I'm too weak to fight back. She wasn't wrong to worry. Cole had seen Crow's men riding the property line almost daily now, always at a distance, always just watching, letting their presence be known, reminding everyone that the clock was still ticking on that debt, and when it ran out, this land would change hands whether Evelyn Dawson was ready or not. Cole had been making his own preparations. He'd ridden into Elkhorn twice more for supplies, paying cash and keeping his interactions brief. The town had a suffocated feel to it, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what Silas Crow would do about the stranger who'd ignored his warnings. The shopkeeper sold Cole what he needed but wouldn't meet his eyes. The blacksmith did work on some tools but refused payment, like accepting money would make him complicit in whatever was coming. Only the bartender at the saloon was willing to talk, and even then, only when no one else was listening. You've got guts, I'll give you that, the man had said, pouring Cole a whiskey he hadn't asked for. Stupid guts, but guts nonetheless. Just trying to help a family in need. That's what the last 3 men who crossed Crow said. One left the territory with a broken arm. One lost his job and his credit at every store within 50 miles. The third one's ranch burned down under mysterious circumstances. The bartender had leaned in close. Crow don't lose, friend, and he don't forget, whatever you think you're doing out there, it ain't gonna end well. Cole had finished the whiskey and left without responding. Because the bartender was probably right. This wasn't a fight Cole could win, not in any conventional sense. Crow had money, power, and the weight of an entire corrupted system behind him. But Cole wasn't trying to win. He was just trying to buy time. The breakthrough with Mason came on a cold morning 3 weeks after Cole's arrival. The boy had been gradually getting braver around the barn, occasionally venturing inside when Cole was working, watching from a safe distance as the big gelding ate and dozed, and generally proved himself to be as dangerous as a sack of oats. This particular morning, Cole was repairing a stall door when he heard soft footsteps behind him. He didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge the presence, just kept working. Mason had learned to trust silence more than words. After a few minutes, a small voice said, "He's big." Cole's hand stilled on the latch he was fixing. It was the first time Mason had spoken in nearly a month, the first real words since watching his mother fall. "Yeah," Cole said carefully, keeping his tone casual. "He is. About 16 hands. That's how you measure horses. From the ground to their shoulder. Does he bite?" "Not unless you stick your fingers in his mouth. And even then, he'd probably just gum them a little. He's getting old, like me, losing his edge." A pause, then, "Mama's getting better." "She is, thanks to your sister taking such good care of her. And you." Mason's voice was barely above a whisper. "Lila says you saved Mama's life." Cole set down his tools and turned slowly. Mason stood in the barn doorway, backlit by weak winter sun, his small frame tense like he was ready to bolt at any second. "Your sister's the one who saved her," Cole said. "I just helped a little. Papa died." It wasn't a question, just a statement of fact delivered in a child's matter-of-fact voice that somehow made it more heartbreaking. "I know, I'm sorry. Lila says horses didn't mean to hurt Papa, says it was an accident." "That's right. Horses don't understand how strong they are sometimes. They get spooked or scared and they react without thinking, and sometimes people get hurt. But it's not because they're mean or bad. It's just because they're horses." Mason took a tentative step into the barn. Then another. His eyes were fixed on Dusty, who had his head down in the feed trough and was making contented munching sounds. "Can I touch him?" Cole's chest tightened. This was a moment that could go either way, could help Mason overcome his fear or reinforce it if something went wrong. He studied his horse, gauging Dusty's mood. The gelding was relaxed, full-bellied, showing no signs of agitation. "Come here," Cole said quietly. "Slow. And stay beside me." Mason crossed the barn with careful steps, his breathing quick and shallow. When he reached Cole's side, Cole took the boy's hand, so small it disappeared completely in his calloused palm, and guided it toward Dusty's shoulder. "Touch right here, on his neck. Firm but gentle. Let him know you're there." Mason's hand trembled as it made contact with warm horseflesh. Dusty shifted slightly, and Mason jerked back, but Cole kept his hand steady. "It's okay. He's just adjusting his weight, see? He doesn't care that you're here. You're too small to worry about." Slowly, Mason relaxed. His palm flattened against Dusty's neck, feeling the solid warmth, the coarse texture of winter coat. And something shifted in his expression, wonder replacing fear, curiosity edging out trauma. "He's soft," Mason breathed. "He's a good horse, patient, the kind who takes care of people who take care of him." They stood like that for several minutes, Mason's hand on the horse, Cole's hand on Mason's shoulder, the barn quiet except for Dusty's rhythmic chewing. It wasn't a cure for the boy's fear, wasn't a magic solution to the trauma he'd experienced, but it was a start. When they walked back to the house together, Mason's steps were lighter, and that night, when Evelyn asked him about his day, he answered in full sentences for the first time since she'd woken up. "I touched Mr. Hart's horse, Mama. His name is Dusty, and he's real gentle, and Mr. Hart says maybe I can help brush him tomorrow if I want." Evelyn's eyes found Cole's across the small kitchen, and in them he saw gratitude so deep it made his throat tight. But the fragile peace couldn't last. 3 nights before the debt deadline, Cole woke to the smell of smoke. He was out of his bedroll and moving before his mind fully processed what was happening. The barn. Something was burning. He grabbed his boots, shoved his feet into them, and burst out of the small room off the kitchen where he'd been sleeping. The yard was lit with an orange glow. Not the barn, the haystack. The precious winter feed they'd been carefully rationing was engulfed in flames, the dry hay burning with terrifying speed. "Lila!" Cole shouted. "Get your mother and brother to the well house. Now!" He didn't wait to see if she obeyed. He was already running toward the haystack, assessing the situation. The fire was too big to fight alone, and it was spreading. Sparks drifting on the wind toward the barn, toward the house, toward everything this family had left. Cole grabbed a bucket and started hauling water from the well, throwing it on the flames. It was useless. He knew that, but he couldn't just stand there and watch everything burn. Not after 3 weeks of work. Not after... Heart! He spun. A figure on horseback was silhouetted against the flames. Then another. Then 3 more. Neighbors. People Cole had never seen before were riding into the yard, dismounting, grabbing buckets and shovels and blankets. "The barn!" someone shouted. "We can save the barn if we stop the spread." They formed a line, passing buckets of water, beating at spot fires with wet blankets, creating a fire break between the haystack and the buildings. Cole worked alongside them, his lungs burning from smoke, his arms aching from the endless cycle of hauling and throwing water. It took 2 hours to get the fire under control. The haystack was a total loss, just smoking ash and the acrid smell of burned fodder. But the barn was safe. The house was safe. And standing in the yard in the pre-dawn darkness, blackened with soot and exhausted, were 8 neighbors who'd ignored Silas Crow's threats to help the Dawsons in their moment of need. Cole recognized the shopkeeper from town, a rancher named Webb who owned land to the south, a woman named Sarah Chen who ran a small horse operation, others whose names he didn't know but whose presence spoke volumes. "That was no accident," Webb said, breathing hard. "Someone set that fire deliberately." "Crow," Sarah Chen spat the name like a curse. "Had to be. He's been escalating for weeks." The shopkeeper wiped soot from his face. "We all know it, but knowing and proving are different things, and Crow's too smart to leave evidence." "So he just gets away with it?" Lila's voice cut through the conversation. She stood in the doorway of the house, her mother leaning heavily on her shoulder, both their faces pale in the firelight. "He tries to burn us out and nobody does anything?" "We're doing something now," Webb said quietly. "We're here, and that counts for something." "Does it?" Evelyn's voice was weak but steady. "Tomorrow he'll make sure you all pay for this. He'll call in debts, cut off credit, make your lives hell just for helping us. That's how he works. That's why nobody helped before." "Maybe," Sarah Chen crossed her arms. "Or maybe we're all just tired of being scared. Maybe watching you fight alone for months while we hid behind closed doors finally got to be too much." "I've been telling people for years that Crow's going too far," the shopkeeper added. "But nobody wants to be the first to stand up to him. Nobody wants to be the example he makes. But Hart here, he's not from around here. He doesn't owe Crow anything, and he stood up anyway." All eyes turned to Cole. He shifted uncomfortably. "I just did what needed doing." "You did what the rest of us should have done months ago," Webb said. "And maybe watching a stranger show more courage than folks who've lived here for decades finally shamed some sense into us." Evelyn stepped forward, wincing with the movement. "I appreciate this. More than I can say. But the debt comes due in 3 days. Even with all of you here, I don't have $1,200. And when Crow takes this ranch, there's nothing any of us can do about it. The law's on his side." "Maybe the law," Sarah Chen said slowly. "But what about public pressure? What about making this so visible, so public that Crow can't just sweep it under the rug?" "What are you suggesting?" Cole asked. "The debt payment is due at the bank in Elkhorn. Public transaction. Lots of witnesses." Sarah's eyes gleamed in the dying firelight. "What if all of us showed up? What if we made it clear that we're watching, that we're standing with the Dawsons? Crow's power depends on people being too scared to unite against him. But if we show him that fear's breaking down, he'll retaliate," the shopkeeper warned, "against all of us. Probably, but there's strength in numbers. He can't destroy all of us without destroying the whole territory's economy. And even Crow's not that reckless. Sarah looked around at the assembled group. What do you say? Are we done being scared? There was a long silence. Cole could see the calculation happening in each person's face, weighing risk against conscience, fear against the chance to finally push back against a man who'd held this territory in his grip for too long. Webb spoke first. I'm in. Me too, Sarah said. One by one, the others nodded. Not enthusiasm exactly, but determination. The kind of grim resolve that came from making a hard choice and committing to see it through. The shopkeeper was the last to agree. All right, but we do this smart. We don't make threats. We don't give Crow any excuse to call in the law against us. We just show up, stand together, and make it clear that the Dawsons have support. That still doesn't solve the money problem, Evelyn said quietly. Even with all of you there, I can't pay a debt I don't have money for. Cole had been thinking about this, turning over the problem in his mind while he worked, while he kept watch, while he planned for a confrontation that seemed increasingly inevitable. How much can you pay? He asked Evelyn. Maybe $300. I've been selling off everything I can, saved every penny, but it's not even a quarter of what I owe. 300 is a start. Cole looked at Webb. The debt's to Crow directly now, right? Not the bank? Right. He bought the note 6 months ago, so it's a private transaction, which means terms can be renegotiated if both parties agree. Crow won't agree, Evelyn said. He wants the land, not the money. He will if we make him. Cole's mind was working through the angles. In front of witnesses. With half the territory watching. If Evelyn offers a good faith partial payment and requests a restructuring of the debt, Crow has two choices: accept it and look reasonable, or refuse it and show everyone exactly what kind of man he is. He'll refuse, Webb said. He doesn't care what people think. He cares about his reputation as a legitimate businessman, Sarah countered. That's why he uses economic pressure instead of outright violence. He wants to be seen as respectable, someone who plays by the rules, even if those rules are rigged in his favor. Exactly, Cole nodded. So we put him in a position where refusing makes him look like the villain, where he has to choose between his image and his greed. It's a gamble, the shopkeeper said. Everything's a gamble. Evelyn straightened despite the pain it caused. But it's a better plan than anything I've come up with. If Mr. Hart and the rest of you are willing to stand with me, I'm willing to try. They talked for another hour, working out details, making plans. When the neighbors finally rode off, the sky was starting to lighten in the east. Cole watched them go, these people who'd found their courage in the middle of the night, who'd decided that maybe community mattered more than fear. You really think this will work? Lila asked. She was standing beside him, wrapped in a blanket against the cold, her face still streaked with soot. I think it's got a better chance than doing nothing. And if it doesn't work? Cole looked down at her, this fierce, determined girl who'd thrown herself in front of a stranger's horse because she refused to give up hope. Then we'll figure something else out. That's what we do. We keep fighting. Lila nodded slowly. Then, in a small voice, thank you for staying, for not leaving like everyone else. I'm not going anywhere. The words came easier now than they had 3 weeks ago. You're stuck with me, kid. At least until your mama's well enough to kick me off the property herself. That earned him a small smile. The first real smile he'd seen from Lila since the day they'd met. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. Cole rode into town to withdraw what money he'd saved from his wages. It wasn't much, maybe $40, but it was something. Webb organized a collection among the neighbors, quietly passing word about what they were planning, gathering support. By the morning of the deadline, they had $460, still less than half of what was owed, but enough to make the offer credible. Evelyn spent the time writing up a formal proposal, a payment schedule, terms for a restructured loan that would give her 5 years to pay off the debt at reasonable interest. It was more than fair. Any legitimate banker would have accepted it without hesitation. But Silas Crow wasn't a legitimate banker. He was a land baron who wanted the Dawson Ranch, and he'd made it clear he didn't care how he got it. On the morning the debt came due, Cole helped Evelyn into the wagon. She was still weak, still moving carefully to avoid pain from her healing ribs, but there was steel in her spine. Lila and Mason climbed in beside her, both scrubbed clean and dressed in their best clothes. This was a formal occasion, a public stand. They rode into Elkhorn together, the wagon wheels crunching on frozen ground. And as they approached the town, Cole saw them, neighbors on horseback, families in wagons, people on foot, all heading in the same direction, all converging on the small territorial bank where Silas Crow conducted his business. By the time they arrived, maybe 50 people had gathered in the street, silent, watchful, a wall of witnesses. Crow was already there, standing on the bank's front steps with his lawyer and two of his ranch hands. His expression was unreadable as he watched the crowd assemble, but Cole caught the flicker of calculation in his eyes. This wasn't what he'd expected. Cole helped Evelyn down from the wagon, steadying her as she found her footing. She walked toward the bank steps with her head high, Lila and Mason flanking her, Cole a half step behind. The crowd parted to let them through. "Mrs. Dawson," Crow's voice was polite, but his eyes were cold. "I see you've brought quite the audience." "I've brought witnesses," Evelyn replied. Her voice didn't shake. "To a legal transaction that concerns the entire community. The debt you owe me is a private matter." "Is it? When your methods affect every family in this territory? When your treatment of one widow sends a message to everyone else about what happens when they cross you?" Evelyn pulled the envelope from her coat pocket. "I'm here to make a payment on my debt and request restructuring of the loan terms." Crow didn't take the envelope. "The debt is due in full today. Those were the terms you agreed to. Terms you imposed after buying the debt from the bank. Terms designed to be impossible to meet." Evelyn's voice carried across the silent street. "I'm offering you $460 as a good faith payment, along with a proposal for a 5-year repayment schedule at 6% interest. It's a fair offer, more than fair." "I don't want your money, Mrs. Dawson. I want the land, as is my legal right when you default on this debt." "Legal, maybe. But is it right?" Webb stepped forward from the crowd. "We all know what you've been doing, Silas. The intimidation, the threats, telling the doctor not to treat her, burning her haystack in the middle of the night." "I have no idea what you're talking about." Crow's expression didn't change. "If Mrs. Dawson had an accident with her hay storage, that's unfortunate but hardly my responsibility." "Nothing's ever your responsibility, is it?" Sarah Chen moved to stand beside Webb. "You just benefit from other people's misfortune. Make sure they fail and then swoop in to claim what they built." "I'm a businessman. I make investments and I expect returns." Crow's voice hardened. "If you good people have a problem with how commerce works, take it up with the territorial legislature. But don't stand in my way when I'm conducting a legal transaction." "Then conduct it legally," Evelyn said. "Accept my payment. Negotiate in good faith. Show everyone here that you're the reasonable businessman you claim to be." For a long moment, Crow just stared at her. The street was so quiet Cole could hear the wind rustling through bare branches. 50 pairs of eyes watching, waiting to see what Silas Crow would do when he couldn't hide behind closed doors and private threats. "No," Crow said finally. "The debt is due in full. You don't have the money. The property is forfeit. That's the law." "The law also allows for renegotiation of private debts," Evelyn countered. "You're choosing not to negotiate, and everyone here will remember that." "Let them remember." Crow descended the steps, moving toward his horse. "You have until sundown to clear your possessions off my land. After that, anything left behind becomes my property." The crowd erupted. Angry voices, protests, people pressing forward. But Crow's ranch hands moved to flank him, hands on their guns, and the crowd stopped. Cole felt Evelyn sag beside him. All that courage, all that hope, and it hadn't been enough. Crow was willing to be the villain, willing to show his true face in front of witnesses because he knew that witnessing wasn't the same as stopping. But then a voice cut through the chaos. "Wait!" Everyone turned. An older man was pushing through the crowd, someone Cole didn't recognize. He was well-dressed, professional-looking, with a leather case under his arm. "Who the hell are you?" Crow demanded. "James Harrison, attorney." The man opened his case and pulled out a sheaf of papers. "I've been authorized by my clients to make an offer on behalf of Mrs. Dawson. I don't care what offer. An offer of $1,200, cash, to purchase the debt from you at face value. Harrison held up the papers. Right here, right now. Legal and binding transfer of the note to a new creditor who's willing to offer Mrs. Dawson the restructuring terms she's requested. Crow's face went red. That's not... Who are your clients? Harrison smiled. A collective investment group made up of concerned citizens. The specifics are in the paperwork. The important thing is the money's real and the offer's legal. Cole looked at Webb, at Sarah, at the shopkeeper. They were all smiling. They'd planned this. The public confrontation had been theater, a way to force Crow to show his hand, but the real solution had been arranged behind the scenes. You can't, Crow sputtered. I don't have to sell. Actually, you do, Harrison said mildly. The note specifies that it can be sold or transferred at the creditor's discretion, but it also includes a standard clause allowing the debtor to arrange for refinancing through a third party, provided the original debt is satisfied in full. These citizens are offering to do exactly that. You can accept their money and walk away whole, or you can refuse and face legal challenges that will tie this up in court for years. Crow's hands clenched into fists. He was cornered, and he knew it. The whole town was watching him lose control of a situation he'd thought he commanded completely. This isn't over, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Yes, it is. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. You're beaten, Mr. Crow. You don't own my debt anymore. You don't own my land, and you don't own these people's fear anymore either. She took the papers from Harrison and signed them with a shaking hand. The lawyer counted out cash to Crow, every dollar accounted for in front of witnesses. And just like that, the Dawson Ranch was saved. The crowd erupted in cheers. People pressed forward to congratulate Evelyn, to shake Cole's hand, to celebrate a victory that felt like more than just one family keeping their land. It felt like a community, remembering how to stand together. Crow mounted his horse without another word. His face was twisted with rage as he rode off, his men following. But he was alone now, and everyone had seen it. Cole found Lila in the crowd. She was crying and laughing at the same time, clinging to her mother with one hand and Mason with the other. When she saw Cole, she broke away and ran to him, throwing her thin arms around his waist. We won, she sobbed into his coat. We actually won. Cole rested his hand on her head, looking over at Evelyn. She was surrounded by neighbors, by friends, by people who'd been too scared to help before but had found their courage when it mattered most. Yeah, he said quietly. We did. The ride back to the ranch felt different than any journey Cole had made in 5 years. The wagon rattled over the frozen road, Evelyn beside him on the bench, the children bundled in blankets behind them. And for the first time since his wife and son had died, Cole felt the weight of isolation lift from his shoulders. Not completely. Grief like that didn't disappear just because something good happened, but enough that he could breathe a little easier. I still can't believe they did that, Evelyn said quietly. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but her eyes held a light Cole hadn't seen before. All those people, pooling their money, standing up to Crow. They were tired of being afraid, Cole said. Sometimes it just takes one person refusing to back down before everyone else remembers they don't have to either. That person was you. Cole shook his head. That person was you. You're the one who wouldn't sell when Crow wanted the land. You're the one who kept fighting, even when you had every reason to quit. I had help. Evelyn's hand found his on the reins, squeezing briefly before letting go. I had a stranger who could have ridden past my daughter and didn't. They traveled in comfortable silence for a while, the landscape opening up around them, rolling hills dusted with snow, the distant mountains sharp against the winter sky, Wyoming territory in all its harsh, beautiful indifference. What happens now? Lila called from the back of the wagon. With the new loan terms and everything? Now we work, Evelyn said. We have 5 years to pay off $1,200. That's $20 a month plus interest. It won't be easy, but it's possible. More than possible, Cole added. The ranch has good bones. With proper repairs and some cattle to rebuild the herd, you could make this place profitable again. We don't have money for cattle. Not yet. But spring's coming. You could take on contract work, hire out for neighboring ranches during roundup and branding season. Build up capital while Cole stopped, realizing what he'd been about to say. While you what? Evelyn asked. While I get the infrastructure rebuilt. Fix what needs fixing so the ranch is ready when you do have livestock again. The words came out carefully, like he was testing their weight. If you want me to stay, that is. I know I've been here more than a month already, and you might want... Stay. Evelyn's voice was firm. Please. If you're willing. Cole glanced at her. She was looking straight ahead, her profile strong despite the obvious pain she was still in from her injuries. A woman who'd lost her husband, nearly lost her life, and still managed to keep fighting for her children and her home. I'm willing, he said. Behind them, Mason let out a whoop that made Dusty, tied to the back of the wagon, snort in surprise. Lila laughed, a real, unguarded sound of pure joy that Cole realized he'd never heard from her before. When they reached the ranch, the sun was setting, painting the weathered buildings in shades of gold and amber. It still looked tired, still showed the marks of struggle and hardship, but now Cole saw possibility instead of just decay. Saw what it could become instead of what it had been. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that felt almost like the life Cole had lost 5 years ago. He rose before dawn and worked until his muscles ached, repairing the barn roof properly this time, replacing rotted fence posts, cleaning out the well and reinforcing its stone walls. Evelyn gradually regained her strength, taking over more of the household work, teaching Lila advanced sewing and cooking while her daughter absorbed every lesson with fierce concentration. Mason became Cole's shadow. The boy followed him everywhere, asking endless questions, handing him tools, chattering about horses and cattle and all the things he wanted to learn. The trauma of watching his mother fall hadn't disappeared. He still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched at sudden movements, but slowly, steadily, he was healing. One afternoon, Cole found the boy standing in Dusty's stall, brushing the gelding's coat with careful strokes. You're getting good at that, Cole said from the doorway. Mason didn't startle. He'd learned to recognize Cole's footsteps, his presence. Dusty likes it when I brush behind his ears. See how he lowers his head? That's called trust. He knows you're not going to hurt him, so he relaxes and lets you do your work. Mason kept brushing, his small face serious with concentration. Then, without looking up, he said, Are you going to marry Mama? Cole's hand stilled on the stall door. What makes you ask that? Lila says you look at Mama the way Papa used to look at her, like she's the most important thing in the world. Mason glanced up, his eyes, John Dawson's eyes, Cole realized, watching Cole carefully. And Mama looks at you that way too sometimes, when she thinks nobody's watching. Out of the mouths of children, Cole cleared his throat. I don't know, Mason. That's complicated. Why? Because I had a family once, a wife and a son. They died 5 years ago, and I spent a long time thinking I'd never want to care about anyone again. Cole moved into the stall, checking Dusty's hooves while Mason continued brushing. Your mama's a remarkable woman, strong and brave and everything a man could want. But I'm not sure I'm ready to... Papa would want Mama to be happy, Mason interrupted. His voice was matter-of-fact, delivering truth the way only children could. He wouldn't want her to be alone forever just because he died. That would be selfish. Cole looked at the 4-year-old boy, startled by the wisdom in those young eyes. Did your mama tell you that? No. But I know it's true. Papa loved us, really loved us. And when you really love someone, you want them to be happy even if you can't be there anymore. Mason set down the brush. Do you love us, Mr. Hart? The question hung in the cold barn air. Cole could deflect, could give a careful answer that protected him from vulnerability, could maintain the emotional distance he'd cultivated so carefully for 5 years. But Mason deserved better than careful answers. Yeah, Cole said quietly. I do. All 3 of you. Even though I didn't plan to, even though I tried not to. Mason smiled, a bright, unguarded expression that transformed his whole face. Good, because we love you too. He said it so simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Then he picked up the brush and went back to work on Dusty's coat, leaving Cole standing in the stall with his heart feeling like it might crack open. That evening, after the children were asleep, Cole found Evelyn on the front porch, wrapped in a quilt and watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. He sat beside her without asking permission, their shoulders almost touching. "Mason asked me something today," he said. "I heard." Evelyn's voice held gentle amusement. "He told me at supper, asked if I thought you'd make a good husband." Cole winced. "What did you tell him?" "That it wasn't his business to ask, and that grown-up relationships are complicated." She paused. "But also that, yes, I thought you would." "Evelyn, let me finish." She turned to face him, her eyes serious in the dim light. "I know you're scared, Cole. I know you lost everything, and you think caring about us means risking that kind of loss again. But I need you to understand something. I'm not asking you for promises you can't keep. I'm not asking you to replace John or to pretend you never had a life before you came here." "Then what are you asking?" "I'm asking you to stop running." Her hand found his, warm despite the cold. "I'm asking you to consider that maybe you've already made a choice by staying, that maybe building a life here, with us, isn't replacing what you lost. It's honoring it by refusing to let grief win." Cole's throat tightened. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for that." "You are. You've proven it every day since you turned your horse around for a desperate girl on a trail." Evelyn's grip tightened. "But I won't push. If you need more time, take it. If you decide this isn't what you want, I'll understand. You've already given us more than we had any right to expect." They sat in silence, hands linked, watching the stars multiply overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and was answered. The wind carried the smell of snow coming down from the mountains. "My son's name was Thomas," Cole said finally. "He was 4, same age as Mason. He loved horses too. Used to follow me everywhere, asking a million questions, getting underfoot in the barn." The words hurt, but they also felt necessary, like lancing a wound that had festered too long. "When the fever took him and Mary, I wanted to die too. Wanted to just stop existing because the pain was too much to carry." Evelyn waited, not interrupting, just listening. "I spent 5 years making sure I'd never feel that way again. Never caring, never staying, never letting anyone need me." Cole looked at their joined hands. "And then Lila threw herself in front of my horse, and everything I'd built to protect myself just crumbled." "I'm sorry you lost them," Evelyn said softly. "I'm sorry you had to carry that alone for so long. I'm tired of being alone. The admission came out rough, scraped raw. I'm tired of running, but I'm also terrified of what happens if I stop. What happens is life. Real, messy, complicated life with no guarantees and plenty of risk." Evelyn shifted closer, her shoulder pressing against his, but also joy and purpose and people who care whether you come home at night. "I've been home," Cole said, "for weeks now. I just didn't want to admit it. Then admit it now." He turned to face her properly, studying her features in the starlight, the strength in her jaw, the determination in her eyes, the vulnerability she was willing to show despite every reason to guard her heart. She was offering him something precious and fragile, a chance to stop running, a chance to build instead of drift. "Evelyn Dawson," he said slowly, "would you consider letting a broken-down drifter court you properly, with the understanding that I'm going to be terrible at it and probably mess up constantly?" Her smile was like sunrise. "I would consider that very seriously. And if I asked you eventually to marry me, knowing I come with ghosts and grief and a past I can't change, would you consider that too?" "I would." Her free hand came up to cup his face, her thumb brushing over his weathered cheek. "I'd consider it strongly enough that I should probably tell you the answer would be yes." Cole kissed her then, soft and careful, like she might break. She kissed him back with a strength that reminded him this was a woman who'd survived a deadly fall, a ruthless land baron, and the loss of her first husband. She wasn't fragile. She was steel-wrapped in grace. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Evelyn was laughing quietly. "What?" Cole asked. "I just realized Lila is probably watching from her window." Cole glanced toward the house and saw a curtain twitch. Definitely watching. "She's going to be insufferable about this. She's earned the right." They sat together until the cold drove them inside, and when Cole finally settled onto his bedroll in the small room off the kitchen, He felt something he hadn't felt in 5 years. Hope. The dangerous, terrifying, wonderful kind of hope that came from believing the future might hold something worth staying for. The community support that had saved the ranch didn't disappear after the confrontation with Crow. Webb and Sarah Chen organized work parties to help rebuild the Dawsons' winter hay supply. Neighbors donated seed for spring planting. The shopkeeper in Elkhorn started extending credit again, carefully noting each purchase in his ledger with payment terms that were actually fair. Crow's influence was waning. Not gone. He still owned too much land, still had too much money to be completely defeated, but diminished. People had seen that standing up to him was possible, that unity could overcome fear. But Crow himself had disappeared. His ranch hand still worked his land, still conducted his business, but the man himself hadn't been seen in Elkhorn or on any of the neighboring properties since the day he'd lost the Dawson debt. "He's planning something," Webb said one afternoon when he stopped by to help Cole repair fence line. "Silas doesn't take defeat lying down. He's quiet when he's scheming." Cole hammered a post into frozen ground. "Let him scheme. He can't touch the debt anymore. The ranch is safe." "The ranch, maybe. But what about you?" Webb gave him a significant look. "You're the one who humiliated him in front of the whole territory, made him look weak. Men like Crow don't forgive that. I'll watch my back. Do more than watch. Be ready." Webb tested the post's stability. "I've known Silas for 20 years. He's patient. He'll wait for the right moment, and then he'll strike where you're most vulnerable." The warning stayed with Cole, adding an edge of tension to the otherwise peaceful weeks. He started carrying his rifle when he worked the far corners of the property, started paying closer attention to unfamiliar riders on the road, started planning escape routes and defensive positions like he was preparing for a siege. But nothing happened. The weeks turned into a month, and still Crow stayed hidden. It was Lila who finally voiced what they were all thinking. "Maybe he gave up," she said one evening at supper. "Maybe he realized he can't win, and he's just going to leave us alone." "Maybe," Evelyn said, but her tone suggested she didn't believe it any more than Cole did. Mason, oblivious to the adults' concern, chattered about the new calf that had been born that morning, the first addition to the slowly rebuilding herd. Neighbors had donated pregnant cows, and now the Dawson Ranch was actually starting to look like a working cattle operation again. After the children went to bed, Cole and Evelyn stood in the barn, checking on the calf and its mother. The baby was all long legs and curiosity, already trying to explore beyond its stall. "New life," Evelyn said softly, watching the calf nurse. "Always feels like a promise, doesn't it? That things can get better, that we can rebuild." "It does." Cole leaned against the stall rail beside her. "I've been thinking about the future, about what this place could become if we keep building it right." "We?" "If you'll have me permanently. Not just as hired help or—" Cole pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold band. Nothing fancy, but it had belonged to his grandmother and was the only thing of value he owned. "Evelyn, I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a couple months, but I'm done pretending I'm going to leave. Done acting like this is temporary." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears as she took the box. "Cole Hart, are you asking me to marry you in a barn?" Seemed appropriate. This is where we spend most of our time. He smiled. "But I can do it proper if you want. In the house. On the porch. Wherever you—" She kissed him, cutting off his rambling, and when she pulled back she was laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes. The answer is yes, you stubborn, wonderful man. I'll marry you." Cole slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, which seemed like a sign from whatever forces governed the universe. They stood there in the warm barn, surrounded by the sounds of animals settling for the night, and Cole felt the final piece of his broken heart click back into place. Not healed, exactly. He would always carry the loss of Mary and Thomas, would always have that scar, but healed enough to love again, healed enough to build a future instead of just surviving. They set the wedding for 3 weeks out, time enough to make arrangements, but not so long that winter weather could interfere. It would be a small ceremony, just family, close neighbors, and maybe the lawyer Harrison who'd helped save the ranch. Nothing fancy, just a commitment made public, 2 people choosing to face whatever came next together. Lila threw herself into preparations with the intensity she brought to everything. She sewed a new dress for the occasion, helped Evelyn alter her wedding dress from her marriage to John, and appointed herself the official supervisor of all wedding-related activities. Mason was less interested in the ceremony itself, but very invested in the idea that Cole would be his new father. "Does this mean I can call you Pa?" he asked one morning while they were feeding the cattle. Cole's chest tightened. "If you want to, but you don't have to. Your real father, my real father is dead." Mason said it without malice, just stating fact. "I miss him. I'll always miss him. But he's gone, and you're here, and you take care of us and teach me things, and..." He trailed off, then looked up at Cole with those serious eyes. "Don't you want to be my pa?" "More than anything," Cole admitted. "I just don't want you to feel like you're betraying your father's memory." "Papa would like you," Mason said with absolute certainty. "He'd be happy Mama found someone good. Someone who stays." 2 weeks before the wedding, Webb rode in with news that wiped the smile off everyone's face. "Crow is back," he said without preamble. "Rode into Elkhorn this morning with a federal marshal. They're saying there's been complaints about vigilante justice and illegal intimidation. They're investigating the night we all showed up at the bank." Cole felt ice settle in his stomach. The marshal believed him? Don't know yet. But Crow's smart. He's not claiming we did anything violent. He's saying we created a hostile environment that prevented him from conducting legal business, that we used mob tactics to force him to sell the debt against his will. "That's ridiculous," Evelyn said. "We just stood there. We didn't threaten anyone." In a territory without strong law enforcement, perception matters more than truth. If Crow can convince the marshal that we operated outside legal channels, he could get the debt sale invalidated, could get the whole thing reversed. "And take the ranch anyway," Cole finished. Webb nodded grimly. "The marshal wants to talk to everyone involved. He's staying at the Elkhorn Hotel, conducting interviews. Cole, he specifically asked about you." Of course he did. Cole was the outsider, the drifter with no ties to the community who'd inserted himself into local business. He was the perfect scapegoat for Crow's narrative of outside agitation. "When does he want to see me?" "Tomorrow, 10 in the morning." Webb met his eyes. "Be careful what you say. This marshal's not on Crow's payroll. I checked. But he's also not from around here. He doesn't understand the context. Doesn't know what Crow's been doing to this territory for years." That night, Cole and Evelyn sat up late, preparing his testimony, going over every detail of what had happened, making sure the truth was clear and defensible. But Cole could see the fear in Evelyn's eyes. "We were so close," she whispered. "The wedding, the future, everything we planned. We're still close. This is just Crow making noise. He can't actually..." "He can. You know he can. He's got money and lawyers. And now he's got a federal marshal listening to his version of events." Evelyn's hands twisted in her lap. "What if they decide in his favor? What if they take the ranch after all?" Cole pulled her close, feeling her shake against him. "Then we fight. We tell the truth and we trust that justice means something, even out here." "Justice," Evelyn laughed bitterly. "Justice is what men with power say it is." She wasn't wrong. Cole had seen enough of the world to know that the law didn't always protect the weak, that sometimes, despite your best efforts, the powerful won simply because they could. But he also knew that giving up before the fight was over guaranteed defeat. "Tomorrow I'll go talk to the marshal," he said. "I'll tell him exactly what happened. And if Crow's story doesn't match the truth, the marshal will have to decide who to believe." "And if he believes Crow?" "Then we appeal. We fight harder. We don't give up." Cole tipped her face up to meet his eyes. "You didn't survive a deadly fall and a ruthless land baron to quit now, and I didn't find a reason to stop running just to let Crow take it away." Evelyn nodded, but the fear didn't leave her eyes. Cole rode into Elkhorn alone the next morning, leaving Evelyn and the children at the ranch with Webb standing guard. The town felt different now, tense, wary, like everyone was waiting for something to break. The marshal was a weathered man in his 50s, with the look of someone who'd spent years enforcing law in places where civilization was more theory than practice. He sat behind a desk in the hotel's small office, making notes in a leather journal. "Mr. Hart, thank you for coming." His voice was neutral, giving nothing away. I'm Marshal Thomas Garrett. I've been sent to investigate allegations of mob intimidation and interference with legal commerce. I understand you were central to the events in question. Cole sat in the chair across from him. I was involved, yes. Tell me what happened. From the beginning. So Cole did. He told the truth. All of it. How he'd stopped to help an injured woman. How he'd learned about Crow's campaign of economic intimidation. How neighbors had been too frightened to help until they saw someone stand up first. How the community had pooled money to buy the debt, all legal and proper. Garrett listened without interrupting, his pen moving steadily across paper. And the night the haystack burned? He asked when Cole finished. Who do you think was responsible? Crow's men, though I can't prove it. Mr. Crow claims you set that fire yourself, to create sympathy for the Dawsons and turn the community against him. Cole's jaw tightened. That's a lie. Can you prove it? Can he prove his version, or is he just making accusations? Cole leaned forward. Marshal, I'm not from here. I have no stake in this territory beyond wanting to help a family in need. Silas Crow is the one with motive to lie. He wanted that ranch, and he lost it fairly. Now he's trying to use you to get it back. Garrett's expression didn't change. I'm not here to help Mr. Crow get anything. I'm here to determine whether federal laws were broken, whether a mob interfered with legal commerce through intimidation. People standing as witnesses isn't a mob. 50 people surrounding a man during a business transaction could be interpreted as intimidation. Or it could be interpreted as a community refusing to let economic bullying continue unchallenged. Cole met the marshal's eyes. You want to know the truth? The truth is Silas Crow has been strangling this territory for years, using debt and fear to control people. The Dawsons were just the latest victims, and when the community finally found the courage to push back legally and peacefully, Crow couldn't handle losing. Garrett set down his pen. I've heard similar stories from other witnesses. Everyone paints Mr. Crow as a villain, and you as a hero. I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who was in the right place at the right time. Or the wrong place at the wrong time, depending on your perspective. Garrett stood, moving to the window. Here's what I think happened, Mr. Hart. I think you're telling the truth about helping the Dawsons. I think Crow probably did try to force them off their land through economic pressure. But I also think that gathering 50 people to witness a debt payment created an atmosphere of intimidation, intentional or not. Cole's stomach sank. So you're ruling in Crow's favor. I'm ruling that the debt sale was conducted under duress and should be reviewed by a territorial judge, which means the status of the Dawson Ranch remains in question until that review is complete. Garrett turned to face him. I'm sorry, Mr. Hart, I know you think you were helping, but the law has to be applied evenly, and that means following proper procedures even when they favor men we don't like. How long will the review take? Months, probably, maybe longer. Months of uncertainty. Months of waiting to see if everything they'd fought for would be stripped away by legal technicality. Cole felt rage building in his chest, hot and bitter. This is what Crow wanted all along, he said. Tie it up in courts. Make it so expensive and complicated that the Dawsons can't fight back. Possibly, but it's also the law. Garrett's voice held something that might have been sympathy. My recommendation is that Mrs. Dawson continue making payments to the current note holders. If the review finds in her favor, the debt will stand restructured. If it finds for Mr. Crow, at least she'll have reduced the principal owed. Cole stood, his hands clenched at his sides. And what happens to Crow in the meantime? Does he face any consequences for years of intimidation? Not unless someone files formal complaints with evidence, which, given how frightened everyone seems to be of him, I doubt will happen. Garrett moved back to his desk. I know this isn't the answer you wanted, Mr. Hart, but it's the most fair I can give under the circumstances. Cole walked out of the hotel feeling like he'd been gut-punched. They hadn't lost yet, but they hadn't won either. They were back in limbo, waiting for distant judges to decide their fate. When he rode back to the ranch and told Evelyn what had happened, she simply nodded, her face blank with the kind of shock that came from having hope yanked away. So we wait, she said. We wait, Cole confirmed, and we keep fighting. But that night, lying in his bedroll and staring at the ceiling, Cole wondered how much more fight they had left. How many times you could get knocked down before you stopped getting back up. Outside, the wind howled around the small house, carrying the promise of snow. Winter was coming, and with it, more uncertainty than Cole had felt since the day he'd turned his horse around for a desperate girl on a trail. The uncertainty settled over the ranch like the snow that began falling 2 days after Cole's meeting with the marshal. Heavy, persistent flakes that blanketed everything in white and made the world feel smaller, more isolated. They were trapped now, not just by winter weather, but by legal proceedings that moved at the pace of distant bureaucracy while their lives hung in the balance. Cole threw himself into work with renewed intensity, as if keeping busy could somehow hold back the creeping dread that they might lose everything after all. He built a proper woodshed to protect their winter fuel supply, reinforced the barn against the weight of snow, checked and rechecked every fence line, every structure, every detail that might fail if left unattended. Evelyn watched him with worried eyes but didn't try to slow him down. She understood the need to feel useful when everything else felt beyond control. Instead, she focused on the children, keeping Mason's spirits up, helping Lila with her studies, maintaining the rhythms of normal life even as the sword of Crow's legal challenge hung over their heads. They postponed the wedding, not canceled. Neither of them could bear to say that word, just postponed until the legal situation resolved. It felt like tempting fate to make permanent promises when their future was so uncertain. "I hate this," Lila said one evening as she helped Cole carry firewood inside. Snow dusted her dark hair, making her look older than her 11 years. "Hate waiting, hate not knowing. At least when Crow was threatening us directly, we could fight back." "We're still fighting," Cole told her, "just differently." "Are we?" "Feels more like we're just sitting here while lawyers argue about papers." She dumped her armload of wood by the fireplace with more force than necessary. "What if the judge decides Crow was right? What if we lose the ranch anyway after everything we did? Then we appeal again, keep fighting until there's no fight left." "And if that doesn't work?" Cole didn't have an answer, because the truth was, if they lost the legal battle, there was nowhere left to go. No higher court. No last-minute salvation. Just the slow, grinding reality of packing up and walking away from everything they'd built. But he couldn't say that to Lila. Couldn't take away the hope that kept her going. "It'll work," he said instead. "It has to." The letter came in mid-January, delivered by a rider who'd pushed through fresh snow to reach them. Official territorial seal, heavy paper, the kind of correspondence that carried weight. Evelyn's hands shook as she opened it. Cole stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, bracing for whatever verdict the distant judges had reached. She read in silence, her face going pale, then flushing, then settling into an expression Cole couldn't quite read. "What does it say?" he asked when he couldn't stand the suspense anymore. "They've ruled." Her voice was barely audible. The territorial judge reviewed the marshal's report and all the witness statements. He found that while the gathering at the bank was unusual, it didn't constitute illegal intimidation. The debt sale stands as executed. The ranch is ours. For a moment, nobody moved. The words hung in the air, too important to quite believe. Then Lila screamed, an actual scream of pure joy, and threw herself at her mother, nearly knocking them both over. Mason started jumping up and down, not entirely sure what was happening, but caught up in the excitement. And Cole felt something in his chest release, a tension he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. "We won," Evelyn whispered against his shoulder when he pulled her close. "Cole, we actually won." "You won," he corrected. "You fought for this land and your children, and you won." But Evelyn pulled back to look at him, her eyes fierce. "We won. All of us together. Don't you dare try to minimize your part in this." The celebration that night was modest, just their small family around the dinner table, but it felt like the finest feast Cole had ever attended. They ate the venison stew Evelyn had been saving for a special occasion, and Cole told stories about his early days as a cowboy that made the children laugh until they cried. Later, after Mason and Lila had finally gone to bed, Cole and Evelyn stood on the porch watching snow fall in the moonlight. The ranch looked peaceful under its white blanket, the struggles of the past months fading into memory. "We should set a new date," Evelyn said. "For the wedding." "You sure? We could wait until spring, when the weather's better, and I'm done waiting." She turned to face him, her expression determined. "We've put our lives on hold for legal proceedings and threats and fear." I want to marry you, Cole Hart. I want to make this official before anything else can try to stop us." Cole kissed her, soft and thorough, tasting joy and relief and the promise of a future they'd fought so hard to secure. "2 weeks," he said. "That enough time to plan?" "More than enough. We're not having anything fancy anyway. Just family and the friends who stood with us." They set the date for the 1st of February, a cold month, but the snow had stopped and the roads were passable. Invitations went out to the neighbors who'd helped save the ranch, Webb and Sarah Chen and the shopkeeper, and a dozen others. Small ceremony, large meaning. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the kind of winter day that made the snow sparkle like diamonds and the sky look impossibly blue. Cole stood in the barn, adjusting his collar for the 10th time, while Webb and the other men who'd arrived early for the ceremony offered useless advice. "You're supposed to be nervous," Webb said, grinning. "It's traditional." "I'm not nervous about marrying Evelyn. I'm nervous about tripping over my own feet in front of everyone." "Just keep your eyes on her. Forget everyone else is there." This from Sarah Chen's husband, who'd apparently survived his own wedding through similar strategy. Mason appeared in the barn doorway, dressed in his best clothes and looking solemn. "Mama says it's time. Everyone's here." Cole's heart kicked up. This was it. The moment that would transform him from a drifter who'd stopped running into a husband, a father, a man with roots and responsibilities and everything he'd spent 5 years avoiding. He was terrified, and absolutely certain this was exactly where he was supposed to be. The ceremony took place in the front room of the house, with neighbors packed in shoulder to shoulder and spilling onto the porch. Harrison the lawyer officiated, reading from a small book of civil ceremonies. But Cole barely heard the words. He was focused entirely on Evelyn. She wore her altered wedding dress, the one from her marriage to John, remade into something new. White fabric with delicate embroidery, her auburn hair pinned up with wildflowers that Lila had somehow found even in winter. She looked beautiful. More than beautiful. She looked strong and determined and absolutely certain of the choice she was making. When Harrison asked if anyone objected to the union, there was a moment of silence that stretched just long enough to make Cole's stomach clench. But then Webb laughed and said, "Anyone fool enough to object to these two getting married can answer to me." And the tension broke into gentle laughter. The vows were simple, traditional words about love and honor and facing whatever came next together. Cole's voice stayed steady until he reached the part about cherishing Evelyn until death do us part. And then emotion caught in his throat because he'd said those words before, had meant them with his whole heart, and death had still torn his first family away. But Evelyn squeezed his hands, grounding him in the present, and he finished the vows without breaking. When Harrison pronounced them married and Cole kissed his new wife, the small house erupted in cheers. Mason was jumping up and down again. Lila was crying happy tears. And the neighbors who'd risked Crow's wrath to stand with them were applauding like this was the finest wedding they'd ever witnessed. The celebration afterward was rowdy and warm, with food that neighbors had brought and music from a fiddle someone produced. They pushed back the furniture and danced in the cramped space, boots thumping on wooden floors, laughter drowning out the wind outside. Cole danced with Evelyn first, a slow waltz that let him hold her close and marvel at the fact that she'd agreed to tie her life to his. Then he danced with Lila, who stepped on his feet only twice and apologized profusely both times. Even Mason got a turn, standing on Cole's boots and holding onto his hands while Cole spun them in circles until they were both dizzy. It was nearly midnight when the last of the guests finally left, riding off into the clear winter night with promises to visit soon. Cole helped Evelyn clean up the worst of the mess while the children slept upstairs, exhausted from excitement. "Happy?" he asked as they worked together, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of people who'd already become partners in everything but name. "Happier than I thought possible 6 months ago." Evelyn set down the dish she'd been washing and turned to face him. "When I was lying in that bed dying, I kept thinking about all the things I'd never get to do. Never see my children grow up. Never feel the ranch thrive again. Never—" She stopped, her voice catching. "Never what?" "Never find love again. I thought that part of my life was over, that I'd had my chance with John and lost it, and that was all I got. She moved into his arms, resting her head against his chest. But then you stopped. You turned around when you could have kept writing, and you gave me a second chance at everything. Cole held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, lavender and wood smoke and home. You gave me a second chance, too. I was dead inside, Evelyn. Walking and breathing, but not really living. Your family brought me back. They stood like that for a long time, swaying slightly to music only they could hear. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows. But inside there was only warmth and the quiet contentment of promises kept. February passed into March, and with it came the slow transformation from winter to early spring. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass that would green up once the warmth truly returned. Cole and Webb worked together to expand the cattle herd, buying young stock at reasonable prices from ranchers who were willing to extend credit now that the Dawsons' standing in the community had been restored. Crow's influence continued to wane. Marshall Garrett's investigation, while it hadn't resulted in the outcome Cole wanted, had at least put Crow's tactics under scrutiny. Other families who'd suffered under his economic pressure began speaking up, filing formal complaints, building a paper trail that might eventually lead to real consequences. One warm afternoon in late March, Cole was working in the barn when he heard horses approaching. Multiple riders. His hand moved automatically toward the rifle he kept nearby, old instincts from dangerous times. But when he stepped into the yard, he recognized the lead rider. Marshall Garrett, still wearing his federal badge, still looking like a man who'd seen too much of humanity's worst impulses. "Mr. Hart." Garrett dismounted stiffly. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Just working. What brings you back to this part of the territory?" "Closure, mostly." Garrett reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a folder of papers. "After my initial investigation, I started hearing from other families, people who'd been too scared to speak up before. Turns out Silas Crow's been running the same playbook for years, buying debts, pressuring people to sell at unfair prices, using economic leverage to force families off land he wanted. We knew that already. Knowing and proving are different things. But with multiple complainants all telling similar stories, and with a territorial judge willing to look at the pattern instead of just individual cases, Garrett handed Cole the folder. Crow's facing federal charges. Mail fraud, because he used the postal system to conduct some of his debt transactions. Conspiracy to defraud. A few other charges that a good prosecutor thinks will stick. Cole stared at the papers, not quite believing. He's actually being held accountable? As much as anyone is in this territory. He'll have lawyers, he'll fight. But his days of operating with complete impunity are over. Well, Garrett's expression softened slightly. I wanted you to know. Wanted to acknowledge that you were right about him, even if my initial ruling didn't reflect that. What changed your mind? I listened. Really listened to what people were saying once they felt safe enough to speak up. And I realized that sometimes the law isn't just about procedures and technicalities. Sometimes it's about protecting people from those who'd abuse power. Garrett gathered his reins. Your fight with Crow, the way you stood up when everyone else was too frightened, it gave others permission to do the same. That matters. After the marshal rode off, Cole took the papers inside and showed them to Evelyn. She read through them carefully, her expression shifting from shock to something that looked like vindication. It's really over, she said softly. Not just for us, for everyone he hurt. It's over, Cole confirmed. That night they sat on the porch with the children, watching the sun set over land that was truly, finally, permanently theirs. Mason chattered about the new calf that had been born that morning. Lila talked about her plans for a vegetable garden once the ground thawed. Normal, everyday concerns of a family that had weathered the storm and come out intact. Spring turned to summer with the kind of abundant generosity that made the previous year's struggles feel like a distant nightmare. The ranch thrived under Cole and Evelyn's combined management. The cattle herd grew. The crops came in better than expected. Neighbors stopped by regularly, not with charity anymore, but with friendship, with requests to trade labor, with the easy familiarity of a community that had remembered how to support each other. Crow's trial dragged on through the summer months, a distant drama that occasionally made its way into territory newspapers. Cole followed the proceedings with detached interest. Whether Crow was convicted or acquitted, didn't change their lives anymore. They'd moved beyond his shadow into something brighter. On a warm evening in late August, Cole found Evelyn sitting on the porch steps, her hand resting on her stomach in a gesture that made his heart skip. "You're pregnant," he said. Not a question. She looked up at him with eyes that held joy and fear and wonder, all mixed together. 3 months along. I wasn't sure at first, but now, she smiled. "We're having a baby, Cole." He sat beside her, pulling her close, and let himself feel the full weight of that revelation. A baby. New life built from the foundation they'd created together. The ultimate promise that the future held hope instead of just survival. "You're not scared?" Evelyn asked quietly. "Terrified," Cole admitted, "but the good kind of terrified. The kind that means I have something worth protecting again." Mason and Lila took the news with enthusiastic chaos. Mason immediately started planning what he'd teach his new sibling. Lila appointed herself the official baby expert, despite having no actual expertise. The house filled with their excited chatter and wild plans. That night, lying in bed with Evelyn curled against him, her hand still resting on the small swell of her belly, Cole thought about the journey that had brought him here. From a broken man who'd sworn never to care again, to a husband and father with everything to lose and every reason to keep fighting. "What are you thinking about?" Evelyn asked sleepily. "About how glad I am that Lila threw herself in front of my horse." She laughed, the sound warm and content. Best decision she ever made. Second best. The first was having the courage to ask a stranger for help in the first place. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, the future spreading out before them like the Wyoming prairie, vast and uncertain and full of possibility. The baby came in February, almost exactly a year after Cole and Evelyn's wedding. A daughter they named Sarah, after Sarah Chen, who'd been one of the first neighbors to stand with them. She had her mother's auburn hair and her father's serious eyes, and she screamed with impressive lung power that made everyone laugh with relief. Cole held his daughter with shaking hands, marveling at her tiny, perfect features, and felt the final piece of his grief transform into something different. Not gone, he would always carry the loss of Thomas and Mary, but integrated, part of his story instead of the end of it. "She's beautiful," Mason whispered, peering at his new sister with appropriate awe. "She's ours," Lila corrected, already fiercely protective. "She's everyone's," Evelyn said from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "Another Dawson to carry on what we've built." Cole looked at his family, his wife, their children, this ranch they'd fought so hard to keep, and felt something settle deep in his chest. Not just contentment, though there was that. Not just love, though there was plenty of that too. Purpose. Belonging. The bone-deep certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Spring came again, as it always did, transforming the brown prairie into rolling waves of green. The cattle grazed peacefully on land that was theirs free and clear. The mortgage payments went out on time every month, steadily reducing the debt they'd fought so hard to restructure. Neighbors helped with spring branding, and the Dawsons returned the favor on other ranches, building the networks of mutual support that made frontier life survivable. One warm May afternoon, Cole was working with Mason in the corral, teaching the boy how to rope a practice post. Mason had grown in the past year, taller, more confident, no longer the terrified child who'd screamed at the sight of horses. He swung the rope with decent form, missing the post but getting closer each time. "Keep your wrist loose," Cole instructed. "Let the rope do the work." Mason tried again, and this time the loop settled over the post perfectly. He whooped with triumph, and Cole felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with the choice they'd both made to build a family together. Pa! Mason had started calling him that months ago, the word coming naturally now. "Did you see?" "I saw. Good work." Cole moved into the corral to adjust Mason's grip. "Now do it again. One good throw doesn't make you a roper. Consistency does." They worked together in the warm afternoon sun, the kind of everyday moment that Cole had thought he'd never have again. Teaching a child, building skills, passing on knowledge, all the small, important work of being a father. When they finished and walked back to the house, they found Evelyn on the porch with Sarah sleeping in her arms and Lila reading aloud from a book. A tableau of domestic peace, that would have seemed impossible 18 months ago when Cole had been a drifter with no destination and no hope. Good session? Evelyn asked. He's getting better. Few more months of practice and he'll be roping cattle. Then he can help with the roundup, Mason said proudly. Like a real cowboy. You are a real cowboy, Cole told him. You work hard, you take care of the stock, you show up when there's work to be done. That's what makes someone real, not just skill, but character. That evening, after the children were in bed and the ranch was settling into nighttime quiet, Cole walked the property alone. This had become his habit, a final check before sleep, making sure fences were secure, livestock safe, everything as it should be. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, it felt like taking inventory of miracles. The barn they'd saved from the fire, now stocked with healthy animals. The house where a family lived and laughed and built memories. The land stretching out in every direction, hard-won and precious. The community that had remembered how to stand together. And inside the house, waiting for him, a wife who'd chosen to trust again. Children who called him father. A baby daughter who represented hope instead of fear. Cole stood on the small hill above the house and looked out at everything he'd almost missed by staying committed to running. If he'd ridden past Lila that day. If he'd refused to help. If he'd let fear and grief keep him isolated and drifting. But he hadn't. He'd stopped. And in stopping, he'd found what he'd been running from all along, the terrible, wonderful risk of caring about people, the vulnerability of having something to lose, the fear that came with love, and also the joy, the purpose, the reason to keep going when things got hard. The ranch lights glowed warm in the gathering darkness. Cole walked toward them, toward home, no longer a man running from loss, but a man rooted in love and the future it promised. He'd spent 5 years trying to outrun grief, trying to avoid the pain that came with caring, and it had taken an 11-year-old girl's desperate courage to show him that some things were worth the risk, worth the fear, worth the vulnerability, worth every terrifying moment of knowing you might lose what you loved most. Because the alternative, a life without love, without connection, without the messy, beautiful chaos of family, wasn't safety. It was just a different kind of death. Cole Hart had been dead for 5 years, but somewhere on a trail in Wyoming territory, a desperate girl had asked a stranger for help, and that stranger had made a choice that brought him back to life. As he stepped onto the porch, Evelyn appeared in the doorway, Sarah sleeping against her shoulder, her smile saying welcome home without words. Everything's secure? She asked. Everything's perfect, Cole replied, and meant it in ways that had nothing to do with fences and livestock and everything to do with the family waiting inside. He'd once ridden through life alone, convinced that isolation was strength and caring was weakness. But standing here on this ranch they'd fought so hard to keep, with his wife and children and the future spreading out before them like an unwritten story, Cole understood a different truth. Love wasn't the risk he'd spent 5 years avoiding. Love was the anchor that kept him grounded when everything else tried to drift away. Love was the reason to fight, the reason to stay, the reason to wake up each morning and choose hope over fear. The Wyoming territory stretched vast and indifferent under the stars, just as it had the day Cole first rode through. But he wasn't riding through anymore. He was standing still, building, growing, creating something that would outlast the struggles that had nearly destroyed it. And for the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, Cole Hart knew exactly where he belonged. He belonged here, home.